How has your journey been on this path of compassion these last 5 weeks? We've been exploring what compassion is and ways to cultivate our compassion. As if, like Black History Month is often treated as a once a year, 1 month focus. But Buddhist teachers remind us that the point of cultivating compassion is so that compassion might become more than a temporary practice or temporary theme, so that compassion might become a way of perceiving, a way of being in the world, a way of relating to all that is and was and will be, including ourselves. Drawing on the loving kindness or metta meditation from the Buddhist traditions, we've been moving outward from compassion for ourselves to compassion for those with whom we have loving relationships, to people we don't really know, to people whose behaviors and perspectives challenge and irk us. 2 Sundays ago, we invited you to find the growing edge of your compassion, to notice where you're holding someone just outside the circle of your active care and concern, and aware of that. And today, we consider the possibility of extending our compassion fully to encompass all beings and all that is. Messy, painful, beautiful, exasperating, exhilarating, and unpredictable as life and the universe and all of its inhabitants are. I've held off naming the root meaning of the word compassion, which originates in ecclesiastical or church Latin, in a word that means to suffer with, to recognize and empathize with, to feel with another who is suffering. As one person put it, compassion is the heart's response to suffering. It begins not in response to some abstract idea of suffering, but to very particular and personal experiences of suffering that move us. PR personnel for nonprofits know this. Speaking of starving children in general, or of a war-torn nation in general, does not garner or generate the same amount of compassion and generous spirit that a photo of one particular suffering child will, or one particular suffering family. Compassion begins in the specific, and that's where we first need to nurture it, in our heart's natural response to suffering. When we can extend our compassion outward all the way into this final, all-encompassing ring in the metta meditation practice, compassion toward all, we move beyond our empathetic response to particular suffering toward a more abstract sense of compassion and a desire to lessen suffering in the world in general, wherever we find it. As Thupten Jinpa puts it, compassion at this level arises as our response to suffering, period. Whose suffering it is should not matter, he says. Now there's compassion at its largest. I've got a ways to go working there. Jinpa quotes Shantideva, the 8th century Indian Buddhist monk, scholar, and poet, who wrote, "Simply because it's suffering, it must be warded off. Why is any limitation put on this? No one disputes and questions why suffering should be prevented. And if suffering must be prevented, all of it must be. And if not, this goes for oneself as well as everyone." Jinpa says that this is where justice and compassion come together, when we can extend our natural compassion for specific suffering outward into a wider, more open responsiveness to all suffering, including compassion for those whose suffering leads them to cause suffering. Whose suffering it is should not matter. As Allison and I thought through this series of services, we wanted here on this final Sunday to look at our collective compassion, the compassion that we share, that we cultivate in each other, that we focus and channel outward together to relieve suffering in the wider community. We wanted to bring the theme around to justice, in other words, which is what love looks like in public, according to Cornel West. Justice, which is calling so loudly these days for our attention and our action, even from our separate homes. UUCM's mission, its congregation's mission, names compassion as the first of the reasons that this congregation exists at all, and the reason members cultivate various strengths in order to create a world more compassionate, sustainable, and just. And it's right that compassion is named first, because a more compassionate world demands a more sustainable and more just world. It's strategic to begin with compassion if we want justice. Compassion for all who suffer. It's a mission worthy of a religious community's heart and soul and commitment, I believe. A mission worthy of the universalist legacy which we inherited, rooted entirely in compassion. Our universalist ancestors could not imagine that anyone would ever need to suffer for all eternity. And so they left behind a whole set of traditions to create a new way of understanding life, the world, and God. This congregation's mission is a mission that demands that compassion be central, that compassion be the grounding for everything this congregation does and how it does it, from the washing of the dishes in the kitchen, to communicating via email, to disagreeing in a meeting, to showing up for rallies for Black Lives with our masks on. I caught up with a friend from seminary this week who began a ministry on the East Coast at the same time that I began my ministry here together with you at UUCM. As part of our conversation, my colleague named the challenge that most every UU congregation I've ever known has faced. He explained that he's been trying to help the congregation he serves to collect and focus its social justice energies in ways that will channel and amplify the members' individual voices into something greater than the sum of the parts. But as different people have different justice causes that speak to their heart most strongly, they've not been able to get beyond the usual set of people doing separate good work in many different areas of the community, wondering why more members aren't joining in their particular cause. I know that sounds familiar. UUCM has faced that dynamic too, and leaders here have sought to focus the justice work of this congregation through a set of task forces. Right now, one focusing on addressing climate change, one focusing on challenging white privilege, and one focusing on being in right relationship with the local indigenous people, the Nisenan. This has indeed helped to focus congregational energies and resources in helpful and productive ways. And I encourage you to lend your energy and support toward one of them. Pick one and join others in that effort. As I was reflecting on what would deepen and strengthen this congregation's collective justice capacity, its capacity to speak truth to power, its ability to draw on its own members' power to change systems in ways that could relieve suffering, help its compassion flourish into solidarity, and its solidarity bear fruit in justice, I realized that it's the same thing that's needed to deepen and strengthen the congregation, period. It's the need to cultivate compassion explicitly as the primary anchor for every aspect of this congregation's life and liveliness. Not simply to name compassion as important or even as central, but to grow compassion, practice compassion, expect compassion, live compassion with each other and as many rings outward as we possibly can. Even and especially in the midst of putting ourselves on the line for the sake of justice in our community and nation. The dominant cultural influences in this nation will always try to pull us toward a self-centeredness that serves no one's true well-being. Even in the midst of a pandemic that ought to be bringing us all together, divisiveness reigns. It is a countercultural and challenging notion to prioritize compassion, to cultivate it courageously, patiently, deeply with each other. But informed and powered by well-developed individual compassion and shared group compassion, focusing compassion outward together would transform everyone involved and truly help us use our power to lessen suffering in all the worlds that we touch. So what would it take to cultivate compassion with that kind of clarity and commitment? That's one of the important questions before us, one that will require our creativity and heart and our focus to answer together as a community. Thupten Jinpa sheds light on a few aspects of the foundation. He shares that the Compassion Lab at the University of Michigan has been studying for 15 years now how compassion can become organized and spread throughout an organization. Researchers at Compassion Lab have found 3 key interrelated factors that allow compassion to take hold. In this moment, they each have a unique poignancy for me. The first is the presence of networks of people who know each other well enough to share their pain. Second, established routines within the organization that foster regular human contact. And a shared set of values that supports compassion. So let's start with the easy one, the values. We're good there. UUCM has got the values, at least in aspiration, and in the hearts and mind of its members and friends, and in the principles of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I've been reading Dr. David Camp's Compassionate Warrior Boot Camp for White Allies, the UU edition. Dr. Camp has been studying dialogue, inclusion, and racial equity for 25 years. And he specifically teamed up with UU Allison Mahaley to create a UU-centered resource for would-be white allies because he found that the values, the principles, and interests of UUs matched his approach to allyship unlike any other predominantly white organizations he's worked with. Dr. Camp's approach to racial equity is rooted in developing and acting from compassion rather than confrontation in order to effectively engage the white people in our lives who are influenceable, but who are not there yet. He takes some heat for this from people who suggest that using compassion to address white supremacy risks coddling us white people in our white fragility. But he makes a very clear case for why, in his experience, compassion is the most effective one-on-one path to a change of heart, and why he was willing to create a spiritual edition of his White Ally workbook for UUs specifically, because of the values to which we aspire. As for establishing routines that foster regular human contact, that's going to take commitment and creativity and action from all of us over the next while as the virus remains a factor in our lives. I know that online connections work well for some of us and not for others. Renee Wiley with Family Ministry and the Caring and Membership teams is initiating an invitation to everyone to make some safe one-on-one connections with each other this summer, whether by phone or snail mail or drive-by or fun quarantinable deliveries or a brief masked driveway visit. Watch for an invitation from Renee, and however you might choose to do it, I would ask you to please reach out to others, to foster some sort of safe enough human contact for your own sake and for the sake of the congregation. Eventually, I trust we'll be able to find that contact more readily and directly in person. Meanwhile, we'll need to work at it together. That first factor, too, will warrant our creative attention now. Nurturing networks of people who know each other well enough to share their pain. UUCM's Soul Matter circles are meant to foster that kind of knowing, but ideally we are investing ourselves in that kind of knowing, at least a little, in every gathering, in every conversation, whether in person or online, in opportunities to reveal a little more of ourselves honestly, and the opportunity to witness with care and compassion others when they reveal themselves a little and honestly. You are not alone. I encourage you to lean courageously into the ways you might get to know others here well enough to share their pain, and for others to know you well enough to share theirs, even while our physical in-person contact is limited. Values, regular contact, networks of people who know each other well enough to share their pain. The pandemic challenges these foundational aspects of compassion in religious community life, at least as we have known them. But I believe they are still important and still available with some creativity, some flexibility, some intention, and some commitment on all our parts. I'm about to take time for study leave and vacation, and I'll be thinking about how I might best cultivate compassion myself and how I might best support compassion in the life of the congregation. I invite you to do the same with courageous love and a sense of wonder as you are reaching out to one another, as you're getting to know each other well enough to share your pain, and as you're working toward a more just world in the ways that you can. I believe that if we truly center compassion as the key, our collective compassion can indeed flourish into solidarity, and our solidarity can bear the fruit of justice. So may it be, or as Phil Hart likes to say, and so it is.